We have a very specific expectation of how a legendary warrior is supposed to go out. It usually involves a slow-motion final stand, an impossible number of enemies, and a blaze of glory on the battlefield. We picture figures like Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, and Genghis Khan facing down an overwhelming force, sword in hand, taking a dozen men with them before falling. But history rarely follows a script. In place of dramatic battlefield sacrifices, the greatest conquerors often met ends that were deeply ironic, completely random, or just embarrassingly ordinary. We can measure the true scale of these historical titans by looking at the exact opposite, the trivial, microscopic, and profoundly human ways they actually died. Take Attila the Hun. He was called the Scourge of God because of his singular ability to extort and terrify both halves of the Roman Empire into paying him tribute simply to stay away. In 453 AD, Attila took a new wife named Ildiko. To celebrate, he threw a massive wedding feast, the kind of party you throw when you hold half the world hostage. He drank heavily throughout the night, eventually passing out in his bridal chamber. The next morning, his men broke down the door. They found Ildiko weeping in the corner, and the most feared warlord in the Western world dead in his bed. No assassin, no enemy army. Attila had suffered a severe nosebleed in his sleep, and because he was too intoxicated to wake up, he drowned in his own blood. A man who held the entire geopolitical fate of Rome in his hands was undone by a microscopic capillary burst. Richard the Lionheart survived the grueling Crusades and walked through sieges that killed men by the thousands. He was described by his peers as fearless to the point of recklessness. In 1199, he was inspecting a small, relatively unimportant castle in France without his full armor on. On the wall was a teenager armed with a crossbow and a frying pan. Richard laughed and applauded the boy's defiance, and then the kid fired. The bolt struck his shoulder but missed his vital organs. Richard actually died 11 days later from the gangrene that set in after a surgeon butchered the extraction. In military history, the list of mathematically undefeated generals is extremely short. Alexander the Great is at the top, having conquered territory across 3 continents by the age of 30. At 32, while planning his next campaign in Babylon, he attended a banquet and drank heavily. 2 days later, a fever set in. Within 12 days, the man who conquered the known world was dead. Fast forward to the year 1066. Harald Hardrada, a giant who served as a royal bodyguard in Constantinople and ruled Norway, landed in England with 300 ships. He had spent his entire life winning wars. At Stamford Bridge, his men were caught off guard. Hardrada fought at the front of the line, roaring and near impossible to stop. Then, amidst the chaos, a single random arrow found the one gap in his armor, his throat. The Viking Age ended with one shot. Surviving thousands of trained combatants offers zero protection against gangrene infection, a viral fever, or pure statistical bad luck. When an opponent is entirely invincible on a battlefield, fighting them there is suicide. The only way to win is to exploit their confidence when they step off the battlefield. Julius Caesar won when he was outnumbered. He won when he was outflanked. He even won when his own men begged him to retreat. So his enemies didn't meet him in a field. On the Ides of March, 60 of his own colleagues, men he had personally pardoned, waited for him inside the Senate chamber, hiding 23 blades beneath their togas. Centuries later, the Oglala Lakota leader Crazy Horse presented a similar problem. He systematically outmaneuvered trained U.S. cavalry forces, completely dismantling Custer's troops at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. By 1877, his people were starving from the constant pursuit. Crazy Horse made the hardest decision of his life. He rode into Fort Robinson peacefully to protect his people. He was led toward what he thought was a meeting room, only to realize it was a jail cell. When he resisted the deception, a soldier drove a bayonet into his back. For warriors who cannot be outmaneuvered, the final weapon deployed against them is their own trust.
But there is a specific tier of commander who realizes the end is coming and decides that, even in death, they will not give their enemy the satisfaction of a trophy. Hannibal Barca terrified Rome for 17 years. When the Romans finally cornered him in Bithynia, they expected a public parade in chains. Instead, Hannibal reached for a plain ring he had worn for years, drank the poison hidden inside it, and died entirely on his own terms. Spartacus died fighting the Roman legions, but his body was never found among the 70,000 casualties. When Genghis Khan died on campaign, his soldiers slaughtered anyone who witnessed the funeral procession and then vanished themselves, ensuring the world could never locate his final resting place. Compare that to the English crown strategy with William Wallace. When they captured the Scottish knight, they designed his execution to be a gruesome, highly public warning to his followers.
The English crown chose that spectacle to silence the rebellion, but that same visibility ensured Wallace could never be forgotten. By disappearing or choosing their own exit, Hannibal, Spartacus, and Genghis Khan turned their own deaths into a final tactical maneuver. They denied the enemy a clean narrative. Out of all the legends in history, one warrior managed to secure complete agency over his own death. Miyamoto Musashi fought his first duel at age 13. He went on to fight 61 duels and won every single one of them. But he didn't die on a blade. In his later years, Musashi put down his swords, moved into a cave, and spent his time writing philosophy and meditating. At 61 years old, suffering from thoracic cancer, he felt the end approaching. He put on his formal robes, sat perfectly upright, and quietly died, no opponent in the room. Musashi met his final shift with the same focus he used in combat, recognizing that nature was the one opponent he could not outmaneuver. The men who rewrote the borders of the known world were brought down by nosebleeds, fevers, deadly infections, and simple human biology. The vulnerability of these titans brings their achievements into focus. These stories prove that world-altering history is made by people who are, in the end, remarkably mortal.